Louisville, Kentucky, spring of 1967. The morning air carried the scent of magnolia blossoms as a government-issued envelope arrived at the modest home where boxing's greatest champion was raised. Inside was an official notice that would set in motion one of the most profound confrontations between an American athlete and his government in the nation's history. Muhammad Ali, born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., stood at the kitchen counter reading the summons with steady eyes. At 25 years old, he had already transformed the sport of boxing with his unprecedented speed, his poetic trash-talking, and his unapologetic self-confidence. He had become the heavyweight champion of the world at 22, shocking the seemingly invincible Sonny Liston. He had changed his name upon joining the Nation of Islam, shedding what he called his slave name in favor of one that reflected his newfound faith. If you want to discover more incredible stories about courageous stands that changed history, hit that subscribe button right now. The summons was not unexpected. For months, the Selective Service System had been reclassifying Muhammad's draft status. Despite previously being deemed unfit for military service due to his reading and writing skills, the government had suddenly found him qualified to serve. The timing struck many as suspicious, coming just as Ali's opposition to the Vietnam War was garnering national attention. "They want me to report for induction," Ali said quietly to his mother Odessa, who stood nearby wringing her hands. "What will you do?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Her son had never been one to bend his principles, even when standing firm meant walking the harder path. "What I must," he replied, folding the paper and placing it on the counter. "I'll report as ordered, but I won't step forward. I won't fight in their war." His younger brother, Rahman, entered the kitchen, immediately sensing the tension. "The draft notice came?" Ali nodded. "April 28th. I'm to report to the induction center in Houston." The decision facing Ali was monumental. To refuse induction meant certain prosecution, the loss of his boxing license, and the heavyweight title he had worked his entire life to achieve. At the peak of his physical prime, he would be banned from the ring and faced with the prospect of prison. Most athletes would have quietly complied, valuing career over conviction. Many of Ali's advisors urged him to accept induction, suggesting he could serve in exhibition matches for the troops without ever seeing combat. It was a compromise that would allow him to maintain his status, his income, and his freedom. But compromise had never been in Muhammad Ali's vocabulary when it came to matters of principle. "They'll take everything," Rahman warned. "Your title, your livelihood, everything you've worked for." Ali gazed out the window at the Louisville neighborhood where he had first learned to fight, first as a skinny kid whose bicycle had been stolen, later as a Golden Gloves champion with Olympic dreams. "They can take the belt, they can take the money, but they can't take my soul." In the following days, Ali consulted with spiritual advisors from the Nation of Islam, with civil rights activists, and with his attorneys. The legal team painted a bleak picture. Refusing induction was a federal offense, carrying a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Moreover, boxing commissions across the country would likely strip him of his license to fight professionally. The cost was clear, yet Ali's resolve never wavered. As the date of his scheduled induction approached, he made a final visit to his childhood mentor, Joe Martin, the police officer who had first introduced him to boxing when Ali was just a 12-year-old reporting a stolen bicycle. "You taught me to stand up for myself," Ali told the older man as they sat in Martin's office at the Columbia Gym where Ali had first trained. "You can't teach a man to fight in the ring and then expect him not to fight for what he believes outside of it." Martin, who had watched the skinny kid named Cassius grow into the heavyweight champion of the world, nodded slowly. He didn't agree with Ali's stance on the war, but he respected the courage it took to hold firm to one's convictions in the face of overwhelming pressure. "Whatever happens," Martin said, "you'll always be a champion in this gym." On April 28, 1967, Muhammad Ali reported as ordered to the Armed Forces Induction Center in Houston, Texas. The press gathered outside, aware that the heavyweight champion had publicly stated his intention to refuse induction. The next day's headlines were already being written, though few could anticipate the seismic impact Ali's stand would have on American society, sports, politics, and his own legendary career. Inside the induction center, fate was preparing to ask Muhammad Ali a question that would echo across generations. His answer would cost him nearly everything in the short term, but ultimately cement his legacy as more than just a boxer, but as a man of principle willing to sacrifice for his beliefs. If this story of courage against the odds has captured your interest, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below about a time when you stood up for your beliefs. Your subscription helps us bring more of these inspiring true stories to light. The Armed Forces Induction Center in Houston hummed with nervous energy as young men from various backgrounds prepared to enter military service. Most approached the process with a mixture of resignation and patriotism. This was, after all, what was expected of American men during a time of war. But a palpable tension permeated the air that April morning as word spread that Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion of the world, was among them. Ali stood out from the moment he arrived, not just because of his fame or his imposing 6'3" frame, but because of the calm certainty he carried. Unlike the other draftees who shuffled through the process with downcast eyes, Ali's gaze remained steady, his posture unbowed by the weight of what he was about to do. The induction process followed a strict protocol: medical examinations, paperwork, and finally, the oath of induction. Each man would be called forward to take a symbolic step and recite words pledging his service to the United States military. It was this step, both literal and figurative, that Ali had decided he could not take. As the hours passed, Ali went through the motions of the earlier stages of processing. He submitted to the medical exam, though he had already been declared fit for service despite previously failing the Armed Forces qualifying test. He completed the necessary paperwork, his penmanship deliberate and precise. All the while, reporters waited outside and military officials watched him with wary eyes, aware of his public statements opposing the war. Shortly before noon, the moment of truth arrived. The draftees were assembled in a large room where they would be called forward individually to take the oath. Ali stood in line, his expression betraying nothing of the turmoil that must have churned within him. Everything he had achieved, his title, his career, his freedom, hung in the balance. Lieutenant Stephen Johnson, the officer in charge of the induction ceremony, had been briefed about the possibility that the famous boxer might refuse induction. As Ali's turn approached, Johnson conferred briefly with his superiors, who instructed him to follow standard procedure. If Ali refused, he would be taken aside and advised of the consequences. He would then be given a second and third opportunity to comply. Cassius Clay, called the induction officer, using Ali's birth name despite his public conversion to Islam and legal name change 3 years earlier. Ali remained motionless. "Muhammad Ali," the officer corrected himself. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, Ali stepped forward to the processing desk, but not to the line where inductees took their oath. The room grew quiet. Even the other draftees, caught up in their own anxieties about what lay ahead, sensed the historical significance of what was unfolding. Here was the most famous athlete in the world, prepared to sacrifice everything rather than compromise his beliefs. Lieutenant Johnson addressed Ali directly, following protocol but with a hint of deference in his tone. "Mr. Ali, when I call your name, you will step forward and take the oath of induction." Ali nodded to indicate he understood. Johnson called the names of several other draftees, each stepping forward in turn. Then Muhammad Ali. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the champion. Ali stood completely still, his feet planted firmly on the ground, his expression resolute. Johnson called his name a second time, per procedure. Again, Ali did not move. After the third call went unanswered, Johnson gestured for Ali to follow him to a private room, away from the other draftees. Inside were two military officers and a Justice Department attorney who had been dispatched to handle this high-profile case. "Mr. Ali," said the attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, "I am required to inform you that refusal to accept induction constitutes a felony under United States law. The penalties include up to 5 years imprisonment and a $10,000 fine. Additionally, you should be aware that the boxing commissions are likely to revoke your license and strip you of your title." Ali listened without visible reaction. "You will be given one final opportunity to accept induction," the attorney continued. "I strongly urge you to reconsider your position." It was then that the senior military officer present, Colonel James Lewis, addressed Ali directly with a question that would come to define this moment in American history. "Mr. Ali, before you make your final decision, I must ask you, do you understand that by refusing induction, you are turning your back on your country?" Ali's response came without hesitation, his voice clear and unwavering. "I'm not turning my back on America. I'm turning my back on the war." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over those present. This wasn't merely a legal stance. It was a moral position, articulated with the same clarity and conviction that had made Ali famous in the ring. "My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother, or some darker people, or some poor, hungry people. In the mud for big, powerful America," Ali continued, expanding on his answer. "They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They didn't put no dogs on me. They didn't rob me of my nationality, rape and kill my mother and father. How can I shoot them, poor people? Just take me to jail." The colonel's face remained impassive, but something in his eyes suggested he hadn't expected this level of moral clarity. He had perhaps anticipated defiance or fear, not this calm assertion. Of principle, the legal machinery moved swiftly after Ali's refusal. Within hours, he was notified that his case would be referred to the Department of Justice for prosecution. By the end of the day, the New York State Athletic Commission had suspended his boxing license and stripped him of his title. Other boxing commissions quickly followed suit. As Ali left the induction center, a throng of reporters awaited. Microphones were thrust toward him as questions flew from all directions. Rather than appearing defeated, Ali stood tall, his eyes clear and focused. "Why are you refusing induction, champ?" called out a reporter from the back of the crowd. Ali's response, delivered with the same poetic cadence that had made his boxing predictions famous, would be quoted in newspapers across America the next day. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." In that moment, Muhammad Ali transcended his role as an athlete. He became something more, a symbol of resistance, a voice for the growing number of Americans questioning the war, and a test case for religious freedom in America. His stand would cost him the prime years of his boxing career, a sacrifice few could comprehend, but it would eventually cement his legacy as not just a great boxer, but a man of profound moral courage. The federal courthouse in Houston, Texas, stood as a monument to legal authority, its columns and marble floors designed to inspire awe and respect for the rule of law. On June 20th, 1967, less than 2 months after his refusal of induction, Muhammad Ali arrived for his trial, navigating through a gauntlet of reporters, protesters, and curious onlookers. The case of United States versus Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., the government deliberately used Ali's birth name throughout the proceedings, had been fast-tracked. reflecting the high-profile nature of the defendant and the government's eagerness to make an example of him. As America's involvement in Vietnam deepened and anti-war sentiment grew, the Justice Department was determined to show that fame would not shield anyone from the consequences of defying the draft. Ali entered the courtroom flanked by his attorneys, Hayden Covington and Quinnen Hodges. Covington was a veteran of religious freedom cases, having represented Jehovah's Witnesses in numerous Supreme Court battles. The legal team's strategy was to argue that Ali qualified for conscientious objector status based on his religious beliefs. As a member of the Nation of Islam, the courtroom fell silent as Judge Joe Ingraham entered and the bailiff called for all to rise. Ingraham, a conservative jurist appointed by President Eisenhower, was known for running a strict courtroom and for his no-nonsense approach to the law. His demeanor, as he took the bench, suggested he viewed this case as straightforward, despite the fame of the defendant. What many observers didn't know was that Judge Ingraham had made a crucial pretrial ruling that would dramatically shape the proceedings. He had denied the defense's motion to present evidence about Ali's religious beliefs, effectively removing the core of Ali's conscientious objector claim from consideration. The trial would focus narrowly on whether Ali had knowingly and willfully refused induction, a fact that was not in dispute. The government's case was presented by Morton Sussman, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. It was remarkably brief. Sussman called witnesses from the induction center who testified that Ali had refused to step forward when his name was called. He entered into evidence the paperwork documenting Ali's refusal. The entire prosecution case took less than 2 hours. When the defense began its presentation, the limitations imposed by Judge Ingraham became starkly apparent. Each time Covington attempted to introduce evidence about Ali's religious convictions or the sincerity of his beliefs, the judge sustained objections from the prosecution. The question of whether Ali qualified as a conscientious objector, the heart of the matter from the defense's perspective, was effectively barred from consideration. By the trial's second day, it was clear that the proceedings were more formality than genuine legal contest. Without the ability to present evidence about Ali's religious convictions, the defense was left with little to work with. The facts of his refusal were not in dispute. The only question was whether that refusal was justified by his status as a conscientious objector, a question the court had already decided not to consider fully. As the trial neared its conclusion, Judge Ingraham turned to Ali directly, a rare moment of personal engagement in what had otherwise been a coldly procedural affair. The courtroom hushed as the judge posed a single, direct question, one that cut to the heart of the case and would elicit an answer that would reverberate through American society. "Mr. Clay," the judge said, deliberately using Ali's birth name, "if you were drafted and inducted into the armed forces, would you refuse to serve your country if ordered to fight in Vietnam?" The question was both simple and profound. It offered Ali a potential opening, a chance to perhaps soften his stance, to suggest that while he opposed the Vietnam War specifically, he was not categorically refusing to serve his country in any capacity. Many in the courtroom, perhaps, even Judge Ingraham himself, might have expected Ali to seize this opportunity to demonstrate a measure of patriotism that could mitigate the severity of his punishment. Ali rose slowly to his feet, his tall frame commanding the attention of everyone present. He looked directly at Judge Ingraham, and with clear, unwavering conviction in his voice, delivered an answer that would be quoted in newspapers across America the following day. "Sir, I have searched my conscience, and I find I cannot be true to my religion and go into an army that prosecutes war against people who have done nothing against me or my nation. I would be serving a system that would do injustice against my own people. I cannot participate in that. I would rather face imprisonment or even face death than to participate in a war that doesn't have the support of my conscience or my religion." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even those who disagreed with Ali's stance could not help but be moved by the quiet dignity and moral clarity of his response. He had not equivocated or sought an easy exit. He had reaffirmed his principles, knowing full well the cost. Judge Ingram's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes suggested that Ali's answer had affected him, even if it would not change the outcome of the trial. The law, as Ingraham interpreted it, left no room for Ali's personal moral convictions, no matter how sincerely held. The jury deliberated for only 21 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. Judge Ingraham immediately sentenced Ali to the maximum penalty, 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Ali stood stoically as the sentence was pronounced, his expression revealing nothing of what must have been a profound personal moment. As Ali left the courtroom, a reporter called out, "What do you think of the verdict, champ?" Ali turned, his face serene despite the crushing legal defeat. "I expected it," he replied simply. "This is the price you pay for standing up for what you believe." The verdict and sentence sent shockwaves through American society. To many, particularly in the sports world, it seemed inconceivable that the heavyweight champion would actually be imprisoned, that his illustrious career would be cut short at its peak. To others, particularly those in the growing anti-war movement, Ali had become an unexpected hero, an athlete using his platform to take a moral stand at tremendous personal cost. As Ali left the courthouse, he was greeted by a group of supporters, chanting his name. Among them were several black soldiers in uniform who had come to express their respect for his stand. The image, Ali surrounded by men who had chosen a different path, but who nonetheless recognized his courage, captured the complex reactions his case had provoked across America. Ali would remain free on appeal, but the boxing world had already rendered its verdict. Stripped of his title and license, the greatest boxer of his generation was effectively exiled from his sport at the age of 25, in the prime of his athletic life. The man who had once proclaimed, "I am the greatest," now faced his greatest fight not in the ring, but in the courts and in the court of public opinion. For 3.5 years following his conviction, Muhammad Ali lived in a strange limbo. Technically free, while his case wound through the appeals process, he was nonetheless a man without a profession. The heavyweight champion of the world had been reduced to giving speeches at college campuses, appearing in Broadway productions, and participating in staged exhibitions that hardly tested his extraordinary skills. These wilderness years, as they would later be called, tested Ali's resolve. The financial impact was devastating. From earning millions as champion, his income plummeted to a fraction of what it had been. The psychological toll was perhaps even greater. To be in peak physical condition, to know yourself to be the best in the world at your craft, and yet to be barred from practicing it. Yet, throughout this period, Ali never expressed regret for his stand. When asked if he missed boxing, he would reply with characteristic defiance, "I'd rather be in jail than be a slave to the white man's war." Public opinion, meanwhile, was shifting. As casualties mounted in Vietnam and questions about the war's purpose grew louder, Ali's stance seemed increasingly prophetic rather than treasonous. The man who had been vilified as un-American in 1967 was, by 1970, viewed by many, especially young people and in the black community, as a principled hero. On June 28, 1970, Ali's legal journey reached the United States Supreme Court. The court had agreed to hear his case, now styled Clay v. United States, focusing on whether his conscientious objector claim had been properly considered by his draft board. The oral arguments were technical, centering on administrative procedures rather than the grand moral questions Ali's stance had raised. But beneath the legal jargon lay a fundamental issue. Could the government force a man to fight in a war that violated his religious beliefs? The court's chambers were packed as the justices heard arguments from both sides. Ali himself was not present. He was in Philadelphia, awaiting news that would determine whether he would spend the next 5 years in prison. On June 28, 1971, exactly 1 year after oral arguments, the Supreme Court announced its decision. By a surprising unanimous vote of 8-0, Justice Thurgood Marshall had recused himself. The court overturned Ali's conviction. The opinion, written by Justice Potter Stewart, was narrow in its reasoning. It held that the government had failed to properly specify which of the 3 possible grounds for denying Ali's conscientious objector status it had relied upon. This procedural error, rather than a sweeping endorsement of conscientious objection, formed the basis for the reversal. Yet the practical effect was monumental. Muhammad Ali was vindicated. He would not go to prison, and most importantly for his legacy, he could return to boxing. When news of the court's decision reached him, Ali was speaking to a group of students at a black college in the South. The audience erupted in celebration. When an aide rushed onto the stage to deliver the news, Ali raised his hands in his signature victory pose, a smile spreading across his face. "The Supreme Court has just announced its decision in your case," a reporter informed him when he emerged from the auditorium. "Justice has been served. Your conviction has been overturned. How do you feel about this vindication?" Ali paused, considering the weight of the moment before responding with characteristic eloquence. "I've won many fights, but this is the one I'm most proud of. I fought for what I believed, not just for myself, but for all people who stand by their principles. When you're right, God will fight your battles." The road back to boxing glory would not be easy. Ali had lost 3.5 years of his prime, from age 25 to nearly 29, an eternity in a sport where youth and reflexes are paramount. Many boxing experts doubted he could recapture his former greatness, yet in one of the most remarkable second acts in sports history, Ali would return to reclaim the heavyweight championship not once, but twice more. His epic battles with Joe Frazier and George Foreman in the 1970s would cement his legacy as not just the most famous boxer of all time, but arguably the greatest. More significant than his sporting achievements, however, was his transformation in the public consciousness. The man who had been widely condemned for his stance against the war became, with time, one of the most beloved figures in American history. His principled sacrifice came to be seen as an act of moral courage rather than an unpatriotic defiance. July 4, 1971, Muhammad Ali made his first appearance on American soil after the Supreme Court decision, attending Independence Day celebrations in Atlanta. As he moved through the crowds, something remarkable happened. White men in business suits, the very embodiment of the establishment that had once rejected him, approached to shake his hand. "You were right about the war," several told him. "We were wrong." In the South, where Ali had once been reviled for his outspokenness on race and his Muslim faith, he found himself welcomed by governors and mayors. The FBI, which had maintained an extensive file on Ali during his anti-war activism, now faced the awkward reality that the man they had investigated as a potential subversive was being celebrated as an American hero. Perhaps the most poignant moment of Ali's rehabilitation in the public eye came in 1996, when he was chosen to light the Olympic flame at the Summer Games in Atlanta. The image of Ali, by then suffering from Parkinson's disease but still regal in his bearing, holding the torch aloft with trembling hands, moved millions around the world. Here was a man who had once been stripped of everything for standing by, his convictions now representing his country on the global stage. In his later years, as his health declined, Ali reflected on the journey that had taken him from pariah to icon. "Standing up for what you believe may cost you everything in the short term," he once remarked, "but in the long run, it's the only way to live with yourself." The courthouse in Houston where Ali had stood trial still stands, though few who pass it today realize its significance in American history. The Armed Forces Induction Center, where he refused induction, has long since been demolished, existing now only in photographs and in the memories of those who witnessed that pivotal moment. But Ali's answer to the judge's question, his unwavering commitment to his principles despite the enormous personal cost, continues to resonate. It stands as a testament to the power of moral courage, to the capacity of one individual to change the course of history through an act of peaceful resistance. In the end, Muhammad Ali's greatest victory was not won in the boxing ring, but in that Houston courtroom, where he refused to compromise his beliefs even when facing the full weight of government power. His answer shocked a nation accustomed to compliance and deference to authority. But with time, that same answer would inspire generations to examine their own consciences and to ask themselves what principles they would be willing to sacrifice everything for. If this story of courage and conviction inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to receive more powerful true stories of individuals who changed history by standing up for their beliefs. Leave a comment below sharing what principles you would be willing to stand up for, no matter the cost. Your subscription supports our mission to bring these important historical moments to light.